Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. Today, I am delighted to return to one of the games that I have recently discovered and fallen in love with, which is Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition. I've talked about this one a lot. I've reviewed some of the other stuff. Today I'm reviewing the second of the two kind of world books, I guess you'd call them. That's what I'm calling them. There's one about the Camarilla, and then there is one about Anarch. Okay? And these books are fun in that they have a few little bits of kind of mechanical rule info at the end, but for the most part, they're just world info. They're setting information. And it's presented entirely as in world documents. Things like zine articles and interviews and police transcripts and essays written by vampires, that sort of thing. I talked about the Camarilla one before, and I really love these. And what stands out to me the most is that both books managed to do a really good job, especially after reading through, the entire thing, of getting you to empathize with that book's point of view. Between the two major factions, Camarilla and Anarch, Anarch feels like the one that is the kind of default good guy a little bit when you come at it from the outside. And you get into this, especially, growing up in the U.S., we have this culture where rebellion is a form of patriotism, right? Where individuality is more important than anything else. And we're seeing that right now. People are willing to, completely ignore public safety and all of these other things in the middle of this quarantine because personal freedom is more important than empire building, than any of the other concerns. And so, because of that, Anarch feels like it would be the natural good guy. But as you read through the Camarilla book, for example, they do a really good job of saying, actually, no, we're the good guys. But while you're reading it, you start to sympathize with their point of view while also seeing lots of problems that they have. How their mindset of control and stability and power makes a lot of sense and is pretty terrible at the same time. The Anarch book is the same, and that's what I really loved about this. Is the Anarch book has a similar attitude of, no, we're the good guys. Our point of view is correct and our methods are correct. And this kind of personal freedom to the point of hedonism, or in some cases just not caring about the vampire world or the human world or anything and just doing your own thing. We are right, and you sympathize with that point of view while at the same time thinking, no, you're not. Your methods are pretty terrible. Your attitudes are often very terrible. And so what what I get out of it, having now read both of these books, is that the Camarilla and the Anarch are both terrible and redeemable in equal measure. Redeemable is the wrong word. Narratively redeemable, meaning that a player or an audience can sympathize with their point of view and join their team and that sort of thing. I think ultimately neither of them are redeemable, and there are no good guys in the world, which is kind of the point of Vampire the Masquerade, that you are playing a bad guy. You are playing a villain who preys on other people to survive and is out for yourself, and for gaining whatever form of power or freedom or whatever else that is important to you. And so ultimately, that I think is the great strength of these books, that you will read each one and go, okay, yes, you're right, even though you're horrible. and then you'll read the other book and go, actually, you're right, and you're also horrible. And that, I don't know, it's a really good indicator of the kind of moral grayness and flexibility that is at the heart of Vampire the Masquerade. Anyway, let's talk about the Anarch book a little bit. Um, this one starts off with several pages that are just talking about, um, you know, this is what we're about. Being an Anarch means X. And what I love about this, and I actually love it so much I talked about it in my Camarilla review, is that it contradicts itself constantly. There will be sections, in fact, here I can show it to you. I don't have a PDF of this, so we're just looking at this thing. Um, so we have this section called What Are We? And every paragraph in here contradicts every other paragraph in here, because among the Anarch, they're kind of defined by the fact that they don't have a central government, that they don't have a unifying ethos. Everybody gets to do whatever they want. And so every different person who's part of the Anarch faction will have a different idea about what the Anarch are and what the Anarch value, and so on and so on. It's a really nice, and it goes on for pages and pages, like what is a good idea, what is a bad idea, and just every paragraph is going to give you a different one, and you'll read it and go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then you read the next one that contradicts it fully and go, okay, that also makes sense. Anyway, it's really neat. And it goes into, it talks about a lot of the history of the Anarch as well. How were the vampires involved with, for example, these two great revolutions that took place in Paris? First of all, you know, the whole guillotine thing, where they started, you know, where the humans were killing the aristocracy, and the vampires were there behind it, and they were like, yes, this is our chance. And they threw down all of these ancient Camarilla rulers and vampires, and for a brief time, Paris was this wonderland. But Paris is too important, and too many of the Camarilla people came back and they took it over again. And then in 1968, with Charles de Gaulle, there was another revolution, and for a very brief time, the Anarch took it over, and then they lost it. And it talks about those sorts of things. It talks about the way that Prague is a big symbol for the Anarch in some ways. It talks about how California, and very specifically Los Angeles, is like they call it the free kingdoms or the free states or something like that, and how this is really kind of an Anarch paradise in that nobody's in charge. It has a few sections that are really fascinating, written by a woman who's just trying to survive. And she is an Anarch person, and she's like, well, this is what I do. And this is, you know, if you're going to travel around, you need to have, you know, you need to plan for some place to stay. You need to plan to gain or lose allies. And if things get desperate, you need to be willing to compromise your principles, if you have any, in order to stay alive. And there are other several sections in here that are all written by the same author, who is a vampire named, who is it? Chinasa Adeyemi, who has like a zine or something. And so a bunch of these are just interviews where Adeyemi will interview this person or that person and try to get their perspective on things. And those are all just unrelated to each other, but giving you this very broad scope look at what Anarch vampires are like. And so it's really great. One of the things that I liked in here a lot was actually there's one interview with a mountain climber, a guy who used to be an avid mountain climber, and then while stuck on a mountain and going to die, he was found and saved by a vampire who's like, the only way you're going to get through this is if I embrace you, turn you into one of the kindred, and did. And dude's been a vampire ever since, but still loves mountain climbing, and so he ignores all the politics. He's not part of the Camarilla, he's not part of the Anarch, he's just his own thing, which makes him part of the Anarch by default. And he just tries to lay low. He tries to, you know, still do exploring things. He actually tried to save a human life at one point because it was, an old climbing friend of his, and he didn't want him to die, and risked breaking the Masquerade by doing this incredible superhuman feat to try to save him. So there's lots of little stories like that. There are, talking about the Vorman sisters who run a nightclub in L.A. and how that's become, or in Vegas. It's in Vegas. Sorry, they they have their own little vampire kingdom, so to speak, in Vegas. Uh, and then there's other people who are trying to, foment actual revolution in parts of the world, and there are other people who just want to party, and there are other people who just want to be left alone. And whereas the Camarilla book was really trying to present to you, the weight and the majesty of these centuries-old vampires trying to control the world, this one is fast-paced and hedonistic and anarchistic, obviously. People who are just saying, well, live fast, die young, even as a vampire. So, at the end, like I said, there are some. Also, there's a whole section called Eat the Rich, which has become a really common catchphrase today, and which has an entirely different connotation if you're a vampire. Anyway, talks about the Duskborn. It talks about which are like the thin-blooded. It talks about the different factions. So right at the end, once we get into this, let's have a look at this. Does the same thing that the Camarilla book did, in where at the end has a section where it starts talking about the major clans. Gangrel, they're a major Anarch clan. Bruja are a major Anarch clan. How do they work? The Caitiff, which are the unaligned vampires, vampires that don't really have a clan, they're all part of Anarch as well. The Duskborn, which are the Thin Bloods, what are they like? How do they work? And then it has a section on traitor clans, and this one's really fascinating because these are the people who, by rights, should be part of the Camarilla. They belong to Ventru or Tremere or something like that, but they've broken away. They've left their clan, they've left the Camarilla, and they're trying to go off on their own. And so they will go through and they'll talk about each of those clans and what their lives are like. Nosferatu, Toreador, all that stuff. Then we get... there's actually several pages of this. Then we get the Ministry. So just like, the core book of 5th edition includes just 8 clans, right? But then the Camarilla book added an extra one, which was the Banu Hakim. They are kind of like a Middle Eastern Muslim Camarilla clan of vampires. And the Anarch book adds the Ministry, which is another brand new clan. They are kind of, I guess they're similar in that they're sort of kind of religiously aligned, but whereas Banu Hakim is Muslim, the Ministry are a cult. They are kind of weirdos and rule breakers, very Anarch in style, and focused on the occult and cultism and things like that. And so, they have all the rules if you want to make a character who is from this clan. And this is where we start to get into actual rules information. And so, for example, every clan has a bane. Every clan has a compulsion that kind of defines them through their flaws. And the one for the Ministry says, Set teaches, because it comes from a cult of Set, that everyone's mind and spirit are bound by invisible chains of their own making. Their blood chafing at these bindings, the minister suffers a burning need to break them. The vampire receives a 2 dice penalty to all dice pools not relating to enticing someone, including themselves, to break a chronicle tenet or personal conviction, causing at least 1 stain and ending this compulsion. So, like, their core flaw as a clan is that they have to constantly be breaking rules and screwing up people's lives, whether their own or somebody else's. And that's a really fascinating idea. They've got some other neat things that they can do, and you can read all about that. But I want to cover some of the other rules information that shows up at the end of the book. One of them is this response algorithm. Okay, because a lot of what an Anarch campaign will be about is hiding from the bad guys, trying to get away from or directly attack the Camarilla or the Second Inquisition. And so it has a whole little section in here that's sort of rules based, but still very narrative. I like it a lot. That says, okay, so we start down here at the bottom, what it calls the swatting flies section. And so if, you know, a group of Camarilla realize that there's some Anarch operating in their area or whatever, what do? Well, they start with one of these low tier things, like try to recruit them, try to pay them off, try to study them, that sort of thing. And then there's a whole little flowcharty kind of web in here that says, well, if you tried to pay them off and say, hey, just take this money or this blood or whatever it is that you're interested in and get out of here, leave us alone. And if that doesn't work, then there's 3 other options it connects to. Erase their enemy, because then you won't have anything to do. Lure them away, or isolate them. And then if one of those, so say you try to pay them to go away and they don't, because you know these are the Camarilla tries to pay the player characters to leave, and the characters are like, we're not going to do that. So then you try to lure them away somehow, and the game master can pick, well, which one of these is going to be their next one. If luring them away doesn't work, then we go promote them or starve them. You know, we really want to get you on our side. We'll let you join our team. We'll let you bring you into the Camarilla. We'll give you some neat stuff. Alternately, we're just going to remove your ability to feed altogether so that you run away. And then it just gets worse and worse until the very top. If none of them have worked, if the player characters manage to resist these Camarilla plots or the Second Inquisition attacks, and they get all the way to the top, it's a land of wolves now, which just means it's open season. We've tried everything. Now we're just going to kill you. And so I like this. It's a nice way of guiding a campaign and of providing intermediate steps between, oh no, you're here, and, well, we're just going to kill you, right? Because it's very easy to default to that. And the Camarilla figure out that you're there. Well, you know, an unimaginative story would be, well, they're just instantly going to kill you. Going through these other steps first add a lot more interest, a lot more role-playing, some negotiation, some scheming, some all of these other things that can really make the story a lot more interesting. So, really like all that stuff. Anyway, that's what that is. Then, of course, it has lore sheets. The Camarilla book had a ton of lore sheets at the end. This one doesn't feel like it has quite as many. The lore sheets are part of character creation. So, for example, this woman, Agatha Starek, she is a famous Anarch who does a lot of stuff, and a lot of the fiction in the book is about her. If you, as a character, have a connection to her, then you can take this lore sheet, and then that gives you access to all these little kind of advantages and talents and flaws and things that you can buy with experience, and that will give you benefits in the game. And so there's one about the Church of Set that obviously relates to the Ministry. There's descendants of these famous Anarchs like Xavier and Tyler. There's a bunch of them, and they're all pretty cool, and I like them a lot. And that's it. That's the whole book. So then you just get, you know, some pictures of some kind of goth photo models at the end that somebody thought looked very anarchy. Anyway, I really like these books, the Camarilla one and the Anarch one both. They do a good job of presenting this setting and of fleshing out the world in a way that comes from and prompts story. It's not just a writer's description of the world and what it's like. Portraying it as in-world documents changes everything. It adds, extra layers and extra complexity to it. It prompts storytelling in a lot of ways and says, oh, this is something you could use in your game because you've just seen other characters go through it, and you think, oh, that actually is a really interesting idea for an event or a catastrophe or an obstacle or whatever. And I've just watched through fiction these characters go through it. I can throw my own characters at it It also prompts, it helps you get to know some of these important NPCs like Salvador Garcia or Agatha Starek and people like that. So because you've read their interviews or you've read their essays or you've read whatever about them, and then so you can bring them into the game and feel like you know them better. Anyway, the two books are really great, very light on mechanics, but what mechanics they do have are there. And for the most part, it's just this in-world narrative storytelling stuff, and I like it a lot. So anyway, thank you for watching. I recommend this book and its companion book very highly. You are wonderful. I will see you on my next review. Bye.